Hello, everybody. I know it's been a while. That's what we do. We record podcasts whenever we feel like it. And yesterday I reached out to my friend Colette to see if she wanted to share some of her heart about being human and some of the things that she's going through on the podcast. And she said yes. And so here we are. I'm going to share who Colette is for me because it's probably different than she'll share like bio things she wants to know about you. But Colette is a long time, like really long time family friend through one of my brothers. She's someone that at one time I hope will be my sister. And she didn't officially become my sister, but she's like a sister or a cousin. And I'm thankful for social media that keeps us connected and slightly seeing what's going on in each other's lives. And I'm excited to have her here today with you to share. And I had told her yesterday, I was like, what 3 things do you want to talk about? And whatever it is, we would talk about. So why don't you introduce yourself and share what you want our audience to know about you? And then we'll dive into your 3 things.
My name is Colette Nies Von Hanna, and I currently live in New Braunfels, Texas. For some of you that may know or may not know, it's about 45 minutes south of Austin, and it's considered South Central Texas. And I'm telling you regionally where I am to give perspective on how that shapes my perspective of the world. It's the beginning of the hill country. I'm about a block from the Guadalupe River and about 5 blocks from the Kamal River in the Guadalupe River watershed and Kamal River watershed. And it's native lands to the Tonkawa, the Lapana Apache, the Humanos, and the Tap Pilam. I always get this pronunciation wrong. Cohilican, I believe, nation. And Tap Pilam means people of the earth. And how what kind of the work I do in the world, and I've always had 2 paths. I have a vocational path and an occupational path. Sometimes they cross, sometimes they don't. And vocationally, I am a socio-ecological feminist theologian.
Say that
And
again, real slow for everybody. I love it.
socio-ecological feminist theologian.
There you go.
And then with and third generation organic gardener. And then occupationally, I'm an energy researcher, and I have a few irons in the fire on a few other things. So that's generally about me. And I'm turning 50 this year. So
Welcome to the confusing but awesome club of 50s.
And I have a 5-year-old. Should I say that? Yes.
Yeah. And some pets and a garden.
Yeah.
I'm taking a breath just to slow down. And I think one of the things that's interesting about having you in the context of the Wild Edges of Being Human show is that you're not in the coachy world. You have your own things that you do for personal and spiritual growth and education and learning. And I see you as somebody who's curious in the world. I see you as somebody who's always learning in the world, but you're not in the industry that I'm in. And so a lot of my friends are in the industry. And so it was so fun when I said, what are 3 things that you think you might want to talk about? And I'll let you go ahead and answer that question. I wrote it down yesterday, but what do you want to talk about today?
The first gut reaction I had was obviously our connection with the land, because that's where my heart is and where the healing takes place. With my function is through gardening or through land and food justice. And then one of the things I brought up with you that was quite vulnerable is that I've been in a shift of transition recently, with coming out of some dark places where I've had the 3 different things happen back to back that was trying emotionally and spiritually. The same scenario, but in 3 different settings. Going through just this really divisive cancel culture, like not necessarily cancel culture, but just this political division that exists in the world today, and how been on the attack end of that, simply for wanting clean air, clean water, and healthy food. And just, I think what we said a little bit yesterday was when you have these kind of structures that you live in, whether it be the academic world, the spiritual kind of church world, it's part of my existence, and then friends or political structures and how that they can collapse. And this idea of what you had going in, hope and kind of faith, for a better word, lack of a better word, in structures that are disintegrating. I don't know if that's
Makes perfect sense. And I noticed tears behind my eyes. We believe, I think you and I are people that believe the best in the world. And we go through life learning these things and wanting to share our heart and show our work with what I'm learning is, and I don't say this as a criticism for me or for you, but a naivete. Like, I think I'm one of my recent episodes, not recent, but I'm like, I'm not an optimist anymore. But what I do want to be is a realist with hope. I don't want to move through the world blind or ignorant of the problems, because otherwise we're just putting a band-aid on the problems. And so I feel a sense of grief from my own experience. I want to give you an opportunity, and listen, I'm not a great interviewer, but I want to give you an opportunity to just share your story around those three things. And I know that as you tell your story, I'll hear things. And I also know that our audience will hear exactly what's supposed to land with their heart. So if you just want to tell us a little bit about the story of those three things and how they all collided.
Yeah, in the wake of 2020, like pre-pandemic, and just with the huge political shift in this country, I decided to run for office. And part of it, there was two
In small
reasons.
town Texas.
Oh yeah, and I'm bleeding heart liberal, and it's all about social justice for me. And I'm in an area that is evolving, but it is very kind of old, staunch, old white man German mentality here. And there's some benefits to that, but there's also, if you're not from here or you're not a founding family, there's some challenges. I am going to tentatively say I'm not going to rehash a lot of it because I've done a lot of work to not look back anymore and to learn to let go of working through the anger. And as my mom would say, what's behind anger is hurt and fear. And I've spent so long in the hurt that I want to look forward now. But basically, I was like completely attacked online and when I was running, and I made a specific vow to myself that I would not say anything negative about my opponent and that I would not give in and try to counteract any arguments made against me. And I'm not going to waste my time or energy on that. And mind you, there was a lot of extremely, what I would think was people that belong to the white hats, like
Yeah.
KKK kind of QAnon
Uh-huh.
group here
Mm-hmm.
that made a lot of threats. They threatened to interrupt the adoption of my daughter. They sent letters to past employers, which is weird because I've been self-employed for 50 years,
Right.
to try to get me fired, like all this stuff, which mind you, these people don't know me. And it hit one of the basis of these three situations. One was political, right? Another one was academia. I listed a lot of sexual harassment within academia in a doctoral program and dealing with kind of a narcissist that then would manipulate group talks within the academic space to undervalue me as a academic. And there was no resolution for it. They were never, and that's another issue. And then another one was a project that I did at a church here, also narcissist, covert
that you are
narcissist.
on staff with.
I
You
wasn't on staff, but I
but
was building an education center and fairly large half-acre garden. And it
I
took
mean, that was a big part
years.
of your community. That, I mean,
Oh yeah, I had been at this
yeah,
church for 10 years. I ended up
yeah,
leaving
okay.
the church. I was forced out
Mm-hmm.
because there was a political divide within the church, and they saw apparently feeding people as a threat,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot more to it than that. I obviously made mistakes. I was naive to what was going on around me. I was so focused on, hey, this is such a big garden. It needs to be self-sustaining. I was looking 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, in creating this whole large enterprise basically for the church and for the community, and so that it could run in and of itself when I walked away. And I was literally confronted numerous times, well, what are we going to do with all this food? And I was like, what a great problem to have if we had too much food, right? And they couldn't see 10 years down the road. They only saw, oh my gosh, our yard's been torn up for 6 months. When is it going to be finished? And they shut it down 3 weeks before it was finished, paid for and everything. So sometimes I think in life we have a vision of, one of the themes is that I tend to see the macro perspective of things. I see 5 to 10 years down the road, or even the political situation 25
Mm-hmm.
years down the road when population hits so, and how are we going to
Yeah.
manage our water? And sometimes people have their narrow vision, they're here and now. And one of the things I've learned is that I have to be aware of who's around me, because sometimes I can be so focused in the future that I forget to communicate with the people around me. This is exactly what I'm doing, and this is why. At least I made mistakes, but I'm not gonna apologize for being who I am. And I'm not gonna apologize because in the long run, that's not where God was to have me. This particular business or political perspective or academic completion or goal is not to be celebrated with those people. I think sometimes we get removed from scenarios and we're allowed to learn in those dark places, because I went to some dark places. I've always been, gosh damn it, people like me. I've gone through life kind of making friends fairly easily, and very privileged, by the way. I can say that I've definitely skated through some things. Not to say I didn't have a difficult childhood, but if it took me almost 45 years to be wronged by the church, that's a place of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, I'm in a doctoral program and I'm getting massively bullied and sexually harassed. That's still a
Yeah.
privilege. I'm in a doctoral program. I have the ability to run for office and raise money. That's a privilege. And so I have that perspective, but I'm really on the outskirts of it now, to where there was almost 4.5 years of it's up and down, same lesson,
Mm-hmm.
but in a different way, political, academic, and spiritual, kind of from all sides. And looking at it, okay, what was my part? What could I have done differently?
Mm-hmm.
But also, hey, this is bringing you to a higher state of yourself. And to know that's given you wisdom for the next thing that you're going to be led to do.
And in between those two places also is, I want to validate the pain and the loss and the grief. It doesn't make the hope in the future and what you're built for any less true. I just know in my world that's something we tend to skate over a lot. And yet those dark times, we're not feeling that hope in that lesson. We're feeling beat to shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to acknowledge that any grief or pain that you felt during those times or confusion, that to me is part of the wild edges of being human, and something that often we're not allowed to talk about because we'll be perceived as being negative or complaining or not powerful. And I'm going to just follow my little nudge. You said your mom said underneath anger is, what does your mom say?
Fear and sadness.
Fear and sadness. And I would add to that, underneath fear and sadness and anger is desire unmet.
Mm-hmm.
And
Like we just
so,
all want to be loved and valued for who we are. And in those three instances, I didn't, I was like, I'm right here. Can you not see what I'm doing? Can you not, at least you might not like my personality or me as a person, but you can't question my honorability in this.
mhm,
I'm literally doing this not for myself, but I'm giving of myself to better my community or to better the earth or to feed people or to break down historical biases and question. And I asked questions of the church. I said, when I do this project, it's gonna make people uncomfortable because I'm gonna ask really difficult questions. Why is it that people in our community are hungry? Why is it that this congregation is 99% white in an area that's primarily Hispanic or Latinx? And they were like, oh, it's good, it's good, it's good. But when you start asking those difficult questions, people get uncomfortable. And instead of sitting the discomfort and wading through it and healing from it, it was easy to allow that discomfort to say, okay, we got to get her out. This is not.
yeah.
And I was threatened. They said that I was trying to steal their church land. They're just it was outrageous. And when I ran for office, people had to watch my house. I had threats and people with big flags driving by.
Yeah,
And
I live in a neighborhood like that too.
and
The intimidation,
but
but
yeah,
it's not just like verbal intimidation, the real threat to safety
right.
and the right
Yeah.
to exist on your own property, in your own world, in your own communities. And then have that on top of, when you were talking just a while ago, the little girl in me felt one of my core wounds is when my benevolent intent is accused of being malicious.
Exactly. So my one of my triggers, I guess triggers is the right word, but and it's been this way since I was young, and maybe because I'm the youngest of four, so I always got blamed for everything. Is when I get blamed for something I didn't do,
Yeah.
and I'm like, wait a second, and it hits on a young level. What do you call it? Your inner child. It hits on a
Yeah.
level that's really deep and brings about in the in these three, I lost friends when I ran for office, and it wasn't because they didn't believe in what I was saying. They believed the noise. Like
Mhm.
this, like people would just make stuff up about you and like
It's so
spread it around.
weird.
I
It's so
couldn't
weird,
imagine running on a
right? Like,
national office. Like I couldn't
uh,
imagine the amount of hate that you get because this was just a tiny county commissioner situation. And I remember asking Wendy Davis once, and
uh,
we were talking, and I said, so how do you deal with the hate? How do you deal with the noise? And she looked at me and she said, you just grow a thick skin. That's easy to say, but to really dive into how do you do that? And when you're actually running for office or you're going through something while you're in the middle of it, it's easy to say grow a thick skin, but when you're sitting in all these emotions and feelings that are sometimes triggering things that are down in the core cellularly on your epigenetic level,
mhm.
you can't grow a thick skin. You might put a mask on, but
Which
I
is a whole
remember,
nother wound
yeah,
for another conversation.
and I
Yeah.
remember my therapist at that time saying, Colette, I don't want you to process any of these feelings. And I said,
What?
she goes, you need to make it to November 4th.
Oh.
And she said, or 5th, I think it was 5th at that time. She said, I need you to put one foot in front of the other and accomplish what you need to do for the day. And you'll process this in 2 months when you get there, because I had been going for a year. And she goes, because if you process all that you take in every day, you wouldn't get anything done, because you would have to allow yourself to feel. And so I put up a guard to get to election day. And so when I lost, I knew I was going to lose, where in the grand scheme of where I was living. But I did a phenomenal job. I couldn't have done it any better. And people supported me, and I got pretty high votes considering. And I feel like I did a good job. The depression hit, and it's not because I lost. It was because I had literally had to take down the shield, right? And process, hey, people believe you tried to get this lady fired when you don't even know this woman, or you tried to do this, and I lost friends for stuff that wasn't even true. This isn't it.
You were detached because of your authenticity. You literally having people leave you when you're being in your authentic, benevolent self is a giant wound.
Yeah.
And then to be tough, I want to share, I don't know if it's going to come up, this quote my friend shared yesterday, and it is by Kylie Wyzobel. I'm probably not pronouncing that, Yzobelle. I'll put it in the show notes. To the people who are emotionally sensitive, who care so much about everything, no matter how hard they try not to, who notice even the smallest things and take everything to the heart, the struggle is valid. I hope you get surrounded with people who are kind enough to understand you. And even if you can't expect everyone to adjust for you, I hope you get extra patience from this world. And so the tender heart that had the heart to feed people, to take care of Mother Earth and bring that into our communities and our policies, and the tender heart of you that is pursuing spirit through your education and your PhD, and then to have that question bullied, weaponized, to turn around to abuse you, is how do we toughen up our hearts when they're just built tender and they're built caring and they're built benevolent?
Yeah. And another layer of that is the kind of Gen X mentality, I think, because I fluctuate between the part of myself that I know is the Enneagram 8. It's very tell it like it is. I tend to have a rougher exterior to some when they first meet me. I'm not afraid to say the thing that needs to be said. But also, on the flip side, I don't want to be ever perceived as playing a victim. And so how do we allow ourselves to say, hey, this was hurtful. This was extremely hurtful. And yet also not consider ourselves some kind of victim. I
think the victim, that whole victim mentality or complaining, is another way of doing the same thing of not wanting to feed people. It's just a different vehicle I have a personal, one of the views I see is like, I see all the ways that society doesn't want us to trust ourselves and process our natural mind, body, spirit, thought, feeling. Like, our emotions have something to teach us. They have wisdom to give us. And but it's not acceptable to feel all these things unless, you can feel it for the 24 hours after the funeral of somebody. And even then, people dismiss it instead of honoring the difficult feelings. And if we really trusted ourselves to metabolize and process through the difficult feelings, we won't stay in a disempowered mode. But to me, what gets disempowered is if we shove it away and it's fermenting in there in a way, it does suck life force energy from us. And if we cannot belong in our difficulties, then we can't metabolize it and it sucks life force energy. But if that wasn't judged, I don't think we would become victims. Right.
Yeah.
I believe that phrase, putting it lightly, it's like a propaganda, right? And you talk about, I've seen this. I remember sometime in the last couple of years, a church that was feeding people in Houston kept getting tickets, and they would feed them every single day. And every single day they would give it. It's like, why is feeding somebody hungry illegal? If we think about it, and this is another thing I really like about you, and I picked up, you have the tender, benevolent, caring heart with the strategic mind. My brain does that too, right? I see 10 years in advance. I see all the patterns. And sometimes I'm going so fast, something happens here. And it doesn't make sense to make food illegal. It doesn't make sense in my system to disempower people. But then when you pull back and look at the systems of oppression,
they're there for a reason.
They want people to be poor. They want people to be in jail. They want people to be tired. They want people to be hungry. They want people to not have their nutrition. And my little short phrase is so that you buy shit you don't need and so that you can be controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It keeps the system going.
It keeps, and so in the same way,
it supports what Wendell Berry calls the spiritual economy.
Yes,
it's the political, financial, and spiritual economy that are so wrapped up into keeping that system in check, or not in check. It's the opposite of in check. It's supported. It's a massive humanitarian crisis when we have people that don't have access to birth control, or people that don't have access to clean water or basic needs of food. Getting back to trauma in the last kind of the evolution of in ecological theology, what I've been focusing on in the last 5 or 6 years is ecological trauma, and that the world in and of itself goes through trauma just like humanity does, or as First Nations call non-five-fingered beings, that they pass trauma along their epigenetics just like we do. And that it has the tendency to influence DNA. And the food you eat, the water you drink, has a history, whether you like it or not. You're ingesting, I think when the Hebrews had ritual aspects of killing animals, they did it because to lessen the trauma. And if you don't think that you're ingesting trauma from something that you're eating, whether it be pesticides, whether it be herbicides, minding there's a lot, whether it be factory farming or whatever, if you don't think that is affecting you, my mom has a saying that if you have an emotion, whether it be anger, not to say that anger is always negative, but just in this scenario, I'll say it is. Unexpressed emotion will resurface later, but only in worse ways. So if you're stuffing down anger or greed or envy, it's going to come out, and it's not going to come out usually in a healthy way.
Yeah. The behavior changes. Yeah.
And so I've just really been diving down into this kind of aspect of epigenetics, and to work through my grief and all these things that I have been through. That is one of the things that I have been looking at, is how generational trauma is passed on through epigenetics, and then expanding that into the world of how are we treating our water, how are we growing our food, that it's everywhere, that understanding the trauma and the grief that exists in the world it's everywhere. And how do you function and continue to have hope and foresight in the middle of it when you're aware of it? My sister, I'm always telling her some random fact I was telling her about the streams in South America having salmon now, and you shouldn't eat South American salmon or Chilean salmon because they were originally a GMO fish. They've just wreaked the ecosystem down there because they have no predators. And she's, how did you hear this, Colette? She's, what? because when you deal with the heavy stuff, all your decisions have consequences. And if you're the more aware that you get about the world that you live in whatever field of study that is, even if it's the field of yourself, field of study of humanity, the more you're going to be aware of how shitty it is. And
there's a reason there's this saying, ignorance is bliss.
yeah, exactly.
I've really been like, that's been the theme of just, slow to me is becoming one of my values and way of being, because when I'm slow, I'm more aware and attuned. And so even being, instead of trying to rush through grief, just being present to, but one of the things was the sadness that I just feel day to day. And I have parts that make up stories that like, oh, you're too depressing. You can't be a leader. Why would anybody want to be a coach if you're this unhappy? And then my soul remembers, my higher self is like, you're holding, I haven't let go of the hope. I think that's why there's the sadness. You're not in ignorance anymore. And ignorance and bliss is, I don't know. I don't have a judgment for it because I couldn't take it back if I wanted to. I couldn't go back to the state of not knowing if I wanted to. And I'm called, right? Like my soul is called to hold the both and to hold both the deep heart of the sadness or the way things aren't working. And like you, my brain doesn't go, oh, look away. My brain goes, let me learn more because I have hope for the future. And it is a mixed, I literally changed my name of my business, Wild Edges of Being Human, not the Container Store plastic box. And one of these days I'm going to stop by that Container Store in Austin, Texas, and I'm going to go get one of those. Remember in the 80s, we had all the little plastic boxes because I want to be able to use it as, I think that's where the systems of the world want us to be. That's where my own psyche wanted me to be. It wanted me to be in spiritual bypassing. It wanted me to be in coachy bypassing instead of learning to be with what is.
Say more about bypassing.
Okay, bypassing is a term. I can't remember the name of the guy who said it, but I think for me, using for a while religion of my youth and the way it lived in my life, because I realized that can be so different, so many people. And then after deconstructing for me, Christianity and my version of Christianity came like this whole spiritual, this whole metaphysical, spiritual, it's hard to put a label on it because if I say new age, it's not like some new age people. But all those things were a coping device so that I would not feel bad. That was my subconscious psychological. Some people use alcohol to not feel bad, and there's a 12-step program for that. But I use these things to avoid looking at reality, to avoid experiencing, feeling my trauma, to avoid, and this is all subconscious. So it's not like I woke up and said, I don't think I want to feel today. And as I have, in my mid 40s, when I was living in Denton, that was my first experience with burnout and a thyroid problem where I was sleeping 20 hours a day, get up in the morning and do a couple coaching calls and then back in bed. I require a lot of sleep, but that was excessive. And so just seeing how, I remember a meditation teacher friend of mine was doing a call with me and he was like, do you have any trauma in your life? And I was like, oh, I went to rich kid school and right. Because the trauma that we all experience, but the trauma that I experienced in my family, there was a lot of good. There was so much goodness with my family and it was unpredictable. And the trauma wasn't what I saw on the afternoon school special of trauma, right? There was right. And I see this a lot. Like when I first got into the coaching world, change your thinking, change your life was, it worked for a while. It was a great Band-Aid. It was a great mask. And there are times and places when that is the right tool for the right moment. But if we're using that tool to avoid something that needs to be seen. What gave me the clarity is last fall when I had my hysterectomy. I knew something was wrong. The first thing she did was the ultrasound, and she saw a couple of things. She was like, I'm going to go ahead and get a CAT scan so that I can know what I'm going to do during this surgery. And it was funny because I was looking up your text the other day, and I just have you in my phone by your first name. I don't have any of your last name. So I was wanting to make sure it was the right you. And I saw all the pictures I had sent you from my CAT scan because I learned how to, they just give you the report. And I was like, I want to see the images. So I figured it out and figured out how to view the images, downloaded the software and stuff. And to see the detail of all these fibroids in my body. And I was like, you can see so much clearer. And now that we can see more clearly, they were able to precisely go in with this robotic, tiny little surgery and remove all that and keep the things that were still living. But if they had gone in there willy-nilly or just said, oh, it's no big deal, it's just being 50 and menopause or whatever, that's bypassing instead of being willing to see the whole picture so that, like you're doing, right? So that like your mind automatically is creating not just a solution that feels good today, but one that works without you, or something that is hope for the generations along. So you have a different vehicle, but I totally relate with that. And so it's interesting just to tack on to that story. I feel like I had to learn to be human. I had to learn, my trauma had me escape my body and go into my head. And so I didn't know how to physically be in my body. I would think my emotions. And
that's different.
I think this is a thing I love.
You're naturally, that's a tough one because
I call it I'm head led. So like some people are body led, they're kinesthetic, they really trust that. But just the way I developed, going to my head and thinking through problems kept me simple. Some
people say the longest journey is from the head to the heart.
Absolutely. And that's when my body started shutting down in the 40s. And so as I pay attention to my body, I want this head and this body and this spirit to be all integrated. So I was heavy spirit and heavy head, but I was leaving this. And to me, it was a more holistic, it wasn't just heal Allison, but it was like this metaphor of wholeness is learn to be with the discomfort. And I love the word metabolize right now. There's nothing to fix, just allow those two things to be together. That's why slow works. And so I also believe that, so there's a piece in there that I haven't fully understood, but in the last few years, I've got diagnosed with ADD and then autism, and I'm still figuring out how those show up in my life. And it's definitely a mind bender because of my internalized identity. But a lot of the things I'm realizing have to do, there's a thing called alexithymia where we don't know how to feel our feelings. Some autistic people, that's one of the markers, is you don't know how to feel your feelings. You just think them, or you can't put words to them, or it takes you a long time to realize what you're feeling. I can think my feelings real quick. But what I've learned is there are actually skills that if I was raising a 5-year-old or that I have a 7-month-old grandbaby, there's certain language that I use when discomfort, like I will never tell somebody to stop crying ever. First of all, that was one of the most damaging things that was ever said to me. And there are actual skills that aren't taught to us.
But so my mom's a psychotherapist, right? And
yeah.
There's some good things and some bad things about having a mom for a psychotherapist, or psychotherapist for a mom, but she's never off. That's the one thing. But she talks about, she did one of her private practices growing up was she worked with children of alcoholics or NA addicts. She had a practice. Her partner worked with the adults and then she worked with children. So she's a play therapist too. And with children, because they're concrete thinkers and you don't develop the ability for abstract thought until around the age of 9 to 11, they don't know how to name their feelings. They can't do it. And it is learned. Even if you have a highly emotional, intelligent child, they still think of things in the third person. And hence why play is really good, because they can externalize their feelings on the sand trap or sand tray or the drawing or whatever it is that they're doing. but she teaches children how to express or how to name feelings by, okay, you feel anger, your face gets hot. Shame, you feel in your gut. It is a deep, visceral feeling. Fear, your chest tightens. She teaches the
body stuff. So I
sensation.
distinguish that with my grown clients of, we have a word for a feeling and we have a cognition of what that feeling is. What is your body? What are the sensations in your body? And that's the thing, these little kids can learn early, but here we are reverse learning.
Right. Like your parasympathetic nervous system.
So we're like, okay, so, I feel angry. Great. What sensations, when you feel angry, what sensations are in your body? Oh, my jaw gets tight. So think about this. I get really excited. And I know we need to finish soon, but it's all connected to me. And I think it's similar. If we don't have those skills, we have various ways of shutting down or coping with that. Mm-hmm. We lose our power. If our ability to understand and know ourselves is stripped from us, then we don't have the energy or will or ability to create change or stand up against structures and systems or people. You're working in the world to help people with a very concrete, with food and nature and water. You're working with ecology and nature, and I'm working to do the exact same thing you are with our inner worlds. Mm-hmm. For the exact same reasons you are. The epigenetics of Stop That Crying Bullshit is generations. And I always, what does that do? For me, my husband's not really into all this, but I remember one time saying to him, I didn't like the way he would respond to something. And instead of saying, quit gritching, I just said, what does that do to the cells in your body? And instantly he took a breath, right? So I have this little visual in my mind of, remember the California raisins? I have like little cells in the body and bone marrow. And they're either like, oh, I feel good, or they're like, right? Yeah. So
what is it like those? What is it? Oh, what's his name? Emoto? I have a.
The water guy. Yeah. It's, but think about it, right? Like the cells in our body are, and the cells of the leaves, and talking to the kids that talk to the rice and the plants and those kinds of things. I want to ask you, as we're getting close to an hour, and I know this is an abrupt change because this could go on for, I love talking about these things, and I'm so grateful to have you and your vehicles and experiences. What would wise, loving Colette say to little Colette who holds some of that really old trauma? If she were to crawl up in your lap, what would you whisper in her ear?
It wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
I think that we carry a lot of stuff with us. And I think that as the youngest child, they call it the kick the cat theory, because the parent take it out on the oldest, take it out on the next, take it out, and the youngest feels the brunt of the whole family. Mm-hmm. Hence, most veterinarians are youngest children, because our next connection is with animals. That is what we parent, is the animals in the house. And hence, I'm surrounded by like 6 animals. But I think when I look back, like when you can see that if you see yourself as a child, and if you can look back into your own childhood, you can see your purpose or calling then.
Oh, yeah.
Now, whether it's nurtured or not, and it may not be, that people go their whole life and never figure it out. But when I look back of the memories that I have on like kind of my traits, mm-hmm. I remember one specific instance where I was sitting on I grew up in Bastrop, Louisiana, and I'm outside the city limits, and I'm sitting on the back porch this memory. And I have a dead field mouse. I didn't know. I was about 5. I didn't know the mouse was dead. I didn't understand life and death at that point, or didn't have the words for it. Maybe we'd lost some dogs, but it didn't look dead. It looked like it was sleeping. And so I set this little field mouse, and I got a little bottle cap of water, and I got a little piece of cheese, and I set him up a little tent so it wouldn't get hot from the sun. And I just sat there with him and watched over him. Ironically, maybe not irony, but years later, I got my clinical pastoral education where I was a chaplain, hospital chaplain for the death and dying. Years. And I still do that, but I'm not working in a hospital system right now. And it's interesting to see theologically. And I did that for my dad, which actually my dad's death is what led me to become a chaplain. But then looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this all along. Even when I was little, I didn't understand death at that point, and I was still doing it, connecting with nature through its trauma and death in its cycle of life. And I remember my mom eventually said, hey, Colette, it's gone. It's not going to wake up. I've been through therapy pretty much almost my whole life, just because when you have a therapist for a parent, you tend to, it's a second language. I think I've done enough internal work to know what it feels like, to know the feelings of helplessness, to know those feelings of innocence lost or whatever. But
it's also true though
it's
also like, it's not your fault is also true for the garden and the church. It's also true for the abuse you suffered by a contemporary, by a professor. And it's also,
it wasn't a professor, it was a cohort, someone.
Oh, cohort. It's also true for these things that go on now. And when we're little, not only did we know that, one of the things I tell my parts is, listen, I can't even promise, I'm married and been married for a long time, but he gets to get hit by a bus tomorrow. So I will never leave you. I will never be right. I will never be an asshole to you, little Colette. I will never abuse you. Will do my best to protect you from the world, but I will never abuse you. You are always safe in my pocket. I'm overlaying a little of the paradigm of internal family systems. So not just inner child work, but for me, that softens some of those triggers, like those cells relax and they don't react so much in the world. And then when they're relaxed, and I think this is what you mentioned a little bit earlier, and we dove into a little bit more, we genuinely can, without manipulating this conversation, we can genuinely land on hope, and we can end on hope, right? So being a realist, being willing to explore all these difficult things, laying all the difficult out on the table, what's your hope moving towards? Lessons you've learned and vision.
One of the things that I feel that God has told me, Holy Spirit, is in those 3 times I was building something for someone else, whether it be my community or my church or the state, and the direction that I'm headed now, I'm building it for me. And it will help all these other people, but I'm doing it for myself. When before it was selfless, I get. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's I call it self-centered. We're self-centered, which is something we were told not to be. But when we're centered in ourselves, then everything in our orbit, right? So you're exactly, I think your language is spot on.
And the irony is, those times when I was being selfless, I was accused of being selfish.
Yeah.
And it's the time that I decided, hey, wait a second, no, I'm building this for myself and the legacy for my child.
Right.
It's not being seen as selfless, as selfish. So it's really interesting. It's a growth pattern, that's for sure.
It's a growth pattern in the context of the propaganda of what, especially women, are taught to do with their skills.
Yeah. Because God forbid you be
Powerful.
smart and all these things. It's one thing you can be smart and you can be successful, but goddamn, you can't be both. And you sure as hell can't be attractive. I don't know.
Yeah.
I I've never been one to really. I've never really been a people pleaser. I guess I had a too dominant mother for that rubbed off. But I've now learned, okay, in the words of, oh my gosh, Remind love me, that knows a complete sentence,
Mm-hmm.
that, I don't need to be involved in all these organizations that I'm to try to help. If I need to, the organization and the stuff has to be my own life. I can't constantly be giving this organization and this
Mm-hmm.
organization, it's literally being thrown back at me. This is what you're not doing. You're not good enough, and
Mm-hmm.
your political differences are different, and
Mm-hmm.
da 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 da. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but
No, it makes perfect sense because I think especially in the social media age, we're all told what we're supposed to believe in and advocate for, and there's only so much energy. And I always use the example of dog rescue, which I've been involved in for a while. And my husband and I have agreement not to foster or take any dogs at the moment, which is killing me. Almost caused divorce a few times. And there's a reason. And so I do a lot of home visits and transport. Nobody sees that. It doesn't make for cute Instagram. And if someone didn't do the transport or the home visits, the rescue wouldn't function. Like if we all follow, instead of saving all the world, what if we follow our soul's nudges? That's what I think is so interesting about this conversation, because a lot of the essences are similar. The vehicles are different.
mm-hmm.
And so you building your vehicle around what matters to you is such an important part of the whole.
And there's a lot of autonomy in that.
Yeah.
Because like when am in the kind of process of, and have been one of the things I see in the long run will be the kind of gardening stint, in which you have also encouraged, and eventually, hopefully, an urban farm. It's mine. You can't tell me what I can teach about. You can't tell me, you can't sit in a board meeting and say that I can't build this fence in this particular way, or can't do this, whatever. Or if I want to wait another
Yeah.
season to build the soil, I can.
Yeah.
And like,
I'm going to quit asking for power. I'm taking it by doing it in my world.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, and part of functioning, I think, in the world is knowing that when you share your vision with someone, these grand visions, that it's rare that you meet anybody that can see your vision.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't see a few years ahead, or they don't have the life experience that you have, or background or family history or anything, they're not going to be able to see it. And to not take people's doubts to heart because they can't see it, they can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they try to attack or tear down something that they can't see when you're clearly can see it, right? And that's okay. You look at all these great inventors over the course of our history, or leaders, they saw something that no one else did, and they kept at it through their failures and through their own personal weaknesses, and got through it to create a better world. And it's just, you just can't give in to the naysayers. They just may not be able to see it, and that's okay.
Such a good reminder. Tattoo that on my forehead. Right. And I do. I have it all around the room, but I think I call it remember who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Remember your vision. Stay on your own mat. There's so many ways to say that, but I think it's really true. And a good encouragement for the moments I think you and I are both coming out of those dark nights of the soul kind of thing. We're not the cheerleader on top going, you got it. We're like, I'm tired, but I'm still going. That was hard, but I'm still going. And so it is a good reminder. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for being with me today and spending time.
Yeah, no doubt. It's been great spending time with you.
Awesome.
Talking.